I'm Nicola Talent and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts. Everybody seems to be talking about why somebody like Steven Gerrard was hanging out with Liam Byrne. Liam Byrne was, I think, brought to court since we last spoke.
Yeah, he's been brought to court. I mean, a very, very brief hearing. It actually wasn't even confirmed whether he'd even appeared in court, but basically it was the most a mentioned date, as they said, and all that was said was that he was planning to fight the extradition to the UK to face weapons charges. So we're going to hear more about that over time, and it may lead to a lengthy court case.
Or not. I mean, I don't know how the Spanish handle these cases, but sometimes it's very quick. The only one I remember that took a while was during COVID, and it was, of course, Gary Vickery, who was trying to not be extradited back to the UK to stand trial with Liam Byrne's brother-in-law.
Yeah, look, there's although the UK have left the European Union, there's a very clear treaty to deal with these cases. You know, it's gonna beyond, you know, something extraordinary coming out. It you know, these things are very likely a done deal at some point in the future.
One way or another, I mean, unlike Daniel Kinahan, whose celebrity friends were able to constantly cite the fact that he had no convictions, which was, you couldn't argue with, because no, he didn't have any convictions. And of course, the first time he was named in the High Court as the head of the Kinahan organised crime group during CAB proceedings, that was a welcome sort of piece of factual information that had been put before the courts for journalists, because they were, you know, they were constantly challenging it. Liam Byrne has convictions and he has lost his home to the Criminal Assets Bureau. I mean, he is very much a known, there is no arguing the fact that he's a criminal. And yet Steven Gerrard, a very famous footballer, chooses to knock around with him. And the two of them, I think, were videoed together. A video that went viral, and you know, they carried on regardless.
Oh, I was kissing it there, yeah. Don Johnson. Oh.
I'm gonna bring you over to my house to a game, and Stevie's gonna come and meet you. Okay?
Yeah, right. You pick a game.
Yeah, I mean, I think in
kids maybe have brought them together.
The kids maybe have brought them together. Liam Byrne's son Lee and Steven Gerrard's daughter Lily are in a long-term relationship, and that seems to have brought the two families together, and they seem to socialise. Obviously, there's no implication on Steven Gerrard or his daughter or Lee Byrne that they're involved in crime, but you know, it is a strange thing. I mean, Steven Gerrard is, you know, one of the most famous footballers of the 21st century. I mean, an absolute superstar, like not a, you know, there is no doubt about it. He's one of the most famous footballers in the UK, one of, and of course he was hanging around with Liam Byrne, at least socialising with him, being willing to be pictured with him, pictured in a video. And of course, Steven Gerrard even came over here and spent time with Liam Byrne's father, Jemmy Jaws Byrne. So it's kind of incredible, I suppose. In a way, like Daniel Kinahan, Liam Byrne seems to have had a second life in the UK, where he associated with people that maybe he wouldn't have got away with associating with over here. Seem to have, you know, linked. Obviously, the Gerrard link is quite stunning, I suppose. But I actually put it up on Twitter, and somebody answer back and said, oh yeah, well sure, you know, Frank Sinatra was hanging around with the mafia and you know, so why shouldn't anybody? But of course, Frank Sinatra was hanging around with the mafia, and they're still writing about it 60 years later.
And it doesn't say it's right just because Frank Sinatra did it.
No, but the point is they're still doing stories about it. I mean, like, as you said, Liam Byrne is not somebody who, it could be said, you know, he's a, you know, a man of clean reputation. Absolutely not. And
I mean, these charges that he's facing are, you know, he's not just been dealing a little bit of cannabis.
No,
this is weapon stuff.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like, you know, you might say cannabis dealing, where are the victims of that crime? But when it comes to gun running and that sort of weaponry which we're talking about, which remember is submachine guns as well as handguns, only being the charges from the NCA are saying that they were being sold in batches of 14. They wouldn't sell them any smaller amount. So there obviously is a clear and obvious...
They're also saying that they were sort of, manipulated in such a way that the signature of the gun couldn't be traced. So in other words, it wasn't only, they weren't only supplying criminal gangs with guns, suspected of doing so, they were also suspected of trying to hide the crimes that the criminals would be associated with. So it's another step, really.
Yeah, I mean, so if you think about it, like Steven Gerrard, a man of beyond, no suggestion of any criminality. But nonetheless, last year, a video emerged of him and Liam Byrne. They were obviously out socialising, maybe having a couple of drinks. They'd obviously recorded themselves on this video, which was sent back to a person in Dublin. The video was Steven Gerrard and Liam were talking, and Steven Gerrard sends a message and tells the guy, look, if you want to come over here, I'll sort you out with tickets. I'll make sure you're put up and all of this. And it's all very friendly and calm and clean. And I mean, at this stage, Steven Gerrard probably, certainly when the video emerged, he was still a Premier League manager, managing Aston Villa at the time, unsuccessfully. It might be clear to say as well. So, it's a funny when you see these two worlds merge and link, and there's kind of, is there a willful blindness about it? I mean, people attempted to put the question to Aston Villa at the time about why were you associating with this guy? Have you anything to say? There was nothing coming back. That was just the way it is. And of course, the children are going out together, and that's the reality. And
so I often look at Lee Byrne and I wonder, is that what Liam Byrne aspired to be in some way? Like Lee Byrne is almost an influencer in his own right now. He has, when he has social media up, he currently doesn't have it up. I think it comes up and down depending on the, who maybe in his immediate family is before the courts or not. But he as a teenager was, when he came of age, I suppose, for his debutant's ball, they were still living in Raleigh Square, the family at the time. So you're talking pre-2016. I can't remember exactly the year. But he was very much pushing his social media out there at that stage. He had rows and rows of designer runners, which he would have up on his Instagram site. And he also was photographed going to his Deb's ball in a Rolls Royce Phantom, which pulled up into the driveway of the house. I mean, how it got around the corner there in Raleigh Square, because it's actually quite tight, little thing where their house is. But nonetheless, the roller got in and into the driveway, and they got in, himself and his date. They were photographed. There was a huge big party in the house in Raleigh Square, which we know in the aftermath we understood was done up to the tune of 750,000, even though the house is only worth 250,000. The maths don't add up there for anybody. There was a private party in the house, and off he went to his Debs. And that was really the kind of the coming of age of Lee Byrne.
Yeah.
And Lee Byrne, after the Regency attack, when his uncle David was murdered, the family, the Byrne, immediate Byrne family, Liam Byrne, his wife Simone, and their other child, or children, I think they've certainly got one, moved out of Ireland and to the UK.
Yeah.
And when we tracked them down in 2018, they were living in a property on Dost Hill Road, which was in Tamworth.
Yeah, I mean, really a beautiful part of that part of England. Like, I mean, these houses are stunning houses.
Tamworth was kind of like, I had been previously over there when we had tracked down Bomber Kavanagh before he was ever really named. Tamworth is a wealthy suburb of Birmingham. It's kind of like the Premiership footballers' place to live.
Yeah.
The house at Dost Hill Road where Byrne was living was actually registered in the name of these family friends in a business they had. And these family friends had come over actually when David Byrne was shot dead. We had previously seen them knocking around Maurice Signs and James Crickmore are the two guys I'm talking about, and I'll go into a little bit of detail about them, who they are and their background. But there were two English businessmen that were very, very close to the Byrne family for years and years before the Regency.
Yeah. And of course, they had a kind of a high profile in England as well over a series of incidents. Maurice Signs in particular had hit the papers, hadn't he, with a dispute with Elton John, was it?
Yeah, I mean, look, Maurice Signs and James Crickmore owned a company. I'm going to refer to my notes here so I get this right, called Leisure Parks Real Estate Limited. And that was buying up caravan parks across the UK for years. And these caravan parks were being marketed as retirement homes for downsizers, right? And Signs often introduced himself as a Romany gypsy to anybody who would listen. He was stinking rich is the only thing we can describe. Hugely wealthy.
And Rolls Royces in particular, many Rolls Royces, and public about it and putting it up on social media himself.
Absolutely. And he did go to head with the singer Elton John because he had these plans in place to turn a site close to Windsor Castle where Elton John had a home and other very wealthy people had a home. He wanted to turn it into a caravan park. Now, I don't know whether that was his sense of humour or whatever, but the neighbours got together and they protested it. And he actually lives in that same area. And I'll come upon the address that he lives in shortly. But it was actually his activities on the race course that had been concerning to the British authorities for a long time, him and his partner James Crickmore. And he was a big gambler, Signs, as was Crickmore. And they had been, the horse racing industry in the UK had actually been targeted previously by well-known members of the criminal underworld, in particular a guy called Brian Wright, known as the Milkman. Yeah,
because he always delivers.
He always delivered. And there had been a big scandal in British horse racing because it had been discovered that he was running a win-to-lose syndicate. Now, if you think about that, horse racing is actually the ideal sport to put money on because you can make a horse lose. Yeah. You can't probably make them win.
No.
But you can definitely make them lose by pulling them back and whatever else during the races or drugging them or whatever. But anyway, that had been all discovered. It was investigated. A lot of it came out during court case, very long, protracted thing. But Signs and Crickmore kind of were there in the horse racing fraternity in and around coming up to 2010 and previous to that. Big gamblers. And it turned out that the British Horse Racing Authority investigated them after suspicions arose that they had jockeys in their pockets. And just like Brian Wright before them, had convinced them to lose on odds-on favourites. Now, a number of races were key to the inquiry, right? And some jockeys were investigated. I'm not going to go through the races, but 10 races in total were investigated. And some jockeys came under scrutiny for sort of holding back their horses or whatever. Anyway, the results of the findings were that Signs and Crickmore were described as the instigators, and they were banned from racing for 14 years. A number of jockeys were brought before the authority. Yeah. Some of them were banned. There was a couple of them, the decisions were overturned. But Signs' telephone records showed that he had, made frequent calls to jockeys, that he had used the accounts of a guy called Peter Gold and his son Nick Gold in order to use their Betfair accounts so that he didn't draw more attention to himself. Anyway, they were banned from racing. That story is much more deep than that. I've given you a brief overview of it. But at the time, the British horse racing authorities kind of rooted them out, banned them from the track, and were happy that at least this wasn't drug money. Yeah. So that was left there. Yeah. And of course then in February 2016, after David Byrne's murder, when Bomber Kavanagh came back to the house as chief mourner, as the godfather of the family, at his side was Crickmore and Signs. Yeah. And all of a sudden, I think the dots began to join that actually, these guys involved in this horse racing scandal are actually really close to Bomber Kavanagh and to Liam Byrne.
Yes, and ultimately in the cab case that would see Liam Byrne's house seized off him in Raleigh Square, Both Signs and Crickmore were named in the affidavits presented in court and described as being connected with that gang. Some of their past was laid out there. Obviously, that's on a criminal case. That's a civil case about Liam Byrne's assets. But just like Daniel Kinahan and Christie Senior and Junior, they were named as associates of Bomber Kavanagh.
Mm-hmm. And when we looked back on our own work that we had done previous to 2016, once we had identified who Signs and Crickmore was, because of course we didn't know who they were before 2016, they rattled up to the house.
Yeah.
And they were clearly with the chief mourners.
They were being treated as people worthy of respect, for want of a better term. They were certainly given prominence at the funeral, right up the top. Mm-hmm. They'd been based over in that part of Birmingham, where, of course, the Kinahans had been themselves for a period of time in the early part of the century. But yeah, they were treated as you could see. I remember seeing Bomber, and we'd only seen older pictures of him, and just thinking why they all deferred to him, and a bit of that deference was given to Signs and Crickmore as well.
But Signs, we were able to look back and previous to 2016, I think around 2014 or 2015, when the Byrnes, both the brothers, the Liam and David, were seen driving around in these super expensive cars. I mean, week after week, we were photographing them. I remember there was cars that I didn't know what they were and found out because of that sort of investigative work. And one of them was a G-Wagon, a Mercedes G-Wagon. There was a Rolls Royce that had, a bar in it, and it had these lights inside, these neon lights inside it and everything. I can't remember exactly the name of that, but we saw them. And this Rolls Royce that had pulled up in Raleigh Square to collect Lee Byrne for his debutant's ball. Of course, they were all actually owned by Signs. And we were able to look back and see that Signs had been the godfather, or he'd been at a Liam Byrne's child's christening just a couple of years before the Regency. And he had been, he or his son had been the godfather of the child. Yeah. That's how close they were.
Absolutely.
Nathan Biggie Little, who is a friend of Lee Byrne's, a young guy, he was named during the CAB proceedings as a very low
level kind of foot soldier, for some term like that was used.
For the Byrne organised crime gang. He was photographed in Signs' home, and I have the address now. It's the Wentworth Estate, which is one of the most exclusive neighbourhoods in Surrey. It had been a home to Sir Bruce Forsyth, Sir Elton John, Sir Cliff Richard,
right,
and even the Sultan of Brunei.
Wow.
And Morris Signs, okay? Yeah. And Nathan Biggie Little and Lee Byrne and all these sort of younger even members of the gang had been over visiting his home, had been staying there, and had been photographed with this collection of cars he has and in them.
Yeah.
And it was almost a lifestyle they've had. And the Byrne family were regulars at Ascot.
Yeah.
I recall seeing photographs of Simone and Liam along with Lee Byrne in the owners' enclosures at Ascot. I mean, again, this was all pre-2016 when they were very, very open about what was going on. But when we did track them down in 2018, we mentioned Dost Hill Road, which was where Liam Byrne was living. And that home was owned by Signs company.
Absolutely. It was owned, but not by him, but it was by a company that he was probably one of the sole directors. So they had this, he is an extraordinarily wealthy person. And there was huge amounts of money just there. I mean, there's just no doubt about how wealthy he was. I mean, remember seeing him on social media, and I think it was up to sort of 8 or 10 Rolls Royces parked there. I mean, incredible money.
And of course, when the cab raided the Byrne house in Raleigh Square, a couple of doors up, because of course they had done this ridiculous job on it. I mean, we did an aerial shot of it before there was drones readily available. And they had actually built, this wasn't an extension, they had no back garden left. They built this monstrosity without planning.
Yeah, which was bigger, I think, than the original house, effectively.
Oh, the thing was huge. There was a playground on the roof of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think at this point, that money had been spent probably before CAB had really started looking at that. Initially CAB had really just looked at the owner of a property. it's only in recent years that they really started going after some of the renovations and some of the holidays that people were taking and really factoring that in. So they'd obviously built this at a certain time. You know, as I said, it was just an incredible extravagance.
So the point I was going to make was a couple of doors up.
Yeah.
There was another home that was under construction.
Yeah.
Of the very same shape and scale. There was a foundations built for an extension of like this enormous, the entire garden being taken in. And there was no deeds to show who the owner was, but the cab suspected that this house was being renovated for Lee Byrne, for the son, for Liam Byrne's son.
Yeah.
And sure enough, as the investigation continued, they realised that the house had been purchased by Morris Signs. So again, another very close link, I mean, almost family. So in Dosthill Road at Two Gates in Tamworth, the house had been purchased for £460,000 sterling by Leisure Parks Real Estate. And that was Signs' and Crickmore's company.
Yeah.
So, and it was in the same neighbourhood as Kavanagh and his wife, Joanne Byrne, who's Liam Byrne's sister.
Yeah.
They lived on Sutton Road. I'm sure Joanne Byrne is still there.
In a particularly stunning house as well, it has to be said.
Absolutely. So that was kind of, I suppose, the sort of way they were living in the UK.
And of course, we got a call from Morris Signs' PR girl at one stage saying he wanted to do an interview and refute all allegations. I mean, of course, when we said we'd do it, and he never came back, you know. I mean, I don't even know what he wanted to refute.
I think any allegations that he'd any links to Daniel Kinahan was what he wanted to refute. Yeah. And at that point, there was rumours that there had been a fallout between the Byrnes and Bomber Kavanagh and Daniel Kinahan. Whether that is the case or not, we've never firmly established. Some people say that Liam Byrne doesn't talk to Sean McGovern, doesn't talk to Daniel Kinahan. Other people say they do. Now, Liam Byrne was one way or another in Dubai up until recently.
Yeah. There certainly was a lot of tensions going on and disagreements as the pressure of the feud and the policing of that feud started to bite. But we don't know if there's been Of
course, it would show some weakness if they weren't talking and in cahoots still with one another. But to go back to Liam Byrne and what I'm saying to you, with Lee Byrne, is this what the father would have wanted? Is this what they would have wanted for themselves, this almost celebrity lifestyle? Like Lee Byrne, as a young man, to my knowledge, has never held down a job.
No.
And yet he was recently caught having clipped his £80,000 sterling BMW on, he was done for some driving offence. He has been dating a string of celebrity influencers.
Yeah.
Like he went prior to Lily Gerrard, there was a girl called Daisy O'Donnell,
another well-known influencer, who would also actually have ties to Ireland. She would have had an Irish family, even though she'd been brought up in the UK and never lived here.
I have to be honest, I had never heard of her before. Daisy O'Donnell, that's showing my age though, isn't it? I don't know these influencers. So what does she do?
She influences Nicola, obviously. Well, influences whatever.
Whatever she wears, people wear.
No, I mean people. I think she runs a clothing line, and there's obviously. We don't need to explain what an influencer is to each other, do we? Because neither of us have a total clue. But no, but basically,
apparently a fashion blogger, actually.
Well, a fashion blogger, yeah, be more pictures than words, I would say. So
strong family roots in Limerick, according to your own SundayWorld.com.
Yes, no, she would have. Yeah, she would have come. She would have had ties to Limerick. Definitely, her family would have come from there. But look, I mean, like Lee Byrne in his own right would be regarded as an influencer because of the number of followers that he would have had on Instagram. People can obviously make money out of that level of following. They can endorse products. People like Daisy O'Donnell, who would have would be able to make a healthy living, and Lily Gerrard herself. Obviously, her father be very wealthy, but in of her own right, even as an 18, I think she's 18 or 19 now, she would be able to make a lot of money from that following, and that's the way it is. So Lee Byrne would be along those lines. I don't know if he has any particular
he's
products he endorses or anything, but there is money to be made, and that kind of celebrity lifestyle that he has. He'd also regularly be photographed with, famous sports people, people like Troy Parrott, who Irish international.
No, I think they're childhood friends.
Well, they are. They
I
are.
think they're part of this kind of new life in the UK and that
Well,
scene.
they probably are a bit in the. Troy Parrott would also be
mix
part
it.
of that influencer
Right.
scene, if you know what I mean. Troy Parrott's obviously a very talented footballer, and
You just call him Proy Trarrett.
Troy Parrott. He's
It is a difficult name to get your head
It is.
around.
No, they'd be childhood friends. I mean, absolutely, and they would have. They're even. They would go back a long way. But he would also be. Lee Byrne would associate with him. So Lee Byrne was associating with all of these people on sort of fringe celebrities, I suppose.
I wonder where they all met, like, or where they meet. I'm sure they go to clubs, and I suppose if you go to Ascot and you're in the owner's enclosure, because he was also hanging around with a guy called Henry Simmons, who was another sort of a reality star character who was on one of these shows.
The Only Way is Essex, I think.
No,
was it?
something to do with Ascot.
Okay.
Ascot something.
Yeah.
They're all sort of, those shows all merge into one for me, to
For
be
people
honest
of
with
our
you.
geriatric age, they do.
Exactly. Well,
Nicola.
I think even some of the younger people, to be honest with you, find it difficult to follow who's who on those shows. But they mix, they mingle, they go out together, they drive, they dress a particular way.
Yeah.
They are photographed. They are the modern day celebrity. And that's what I just wonder, is that what growing up in Crumlin, is that what Liam Byrne wanted? Is that what Simone McEnroe, his long-term partner, wanted? Did they want that celebrity? Okay, he went into violent organised crime and drug dealing, but they did, a lot of them from that scene, from that Crumlin Drimna scene, particularly on the Byrne side of things, not so much maybe on the Rattigan side of that feuding thing, but they collected money, runners.
Yeah, but I think they had a lot of
holidays.
Yeah, conspicuous consumption,
Big time.
Big time. And if you contrast it to your old pal, the Penguin, Mr. Georgie Mitchell, like the opposite to conspicuous consumption, driving around in his old banger, like they were the opposite. And I think particularly before the Regency, they went through a phase where everybody associated with them was going around in these motorbikes, these incredible cars. Some of those cars, of course, became the focus of the cab investigation through the company that Liam Byrne ran with Sean McGovern. So there was a huge level of just designer goods at all moments. Absolutely. So maybe that is
spend. And I mean, like Joanne Byrne, Thomas Bomber Kavanagh's wife, Liam Byrne's sister, she was, for her 40th birthday, sent to Vegas along with, 40 of her gal pals, all expenses paid to the Wynn Hotel. Bomber Kavanagh himself was known as a big spender. I'm talking way before he became a sort of a semi-household name, when the officers who would have patrolled the sort of Crumlin area, who would have known him growing up before he left the country, before the Criminal Assets Bureau went for him, they knew him, and they were seeing him coming back like Santa Claus with presents, with these cars that were bigger, more expensive each time he came back. He came back dripping in Rolex watches, in designer clothes. It's almost a kind of a culture with them.
Yeah, I think they went through a phase as well of feeling a bit untouchable. I mean, they had a system set up, say, in terms of the cars, where, these cars weren't being bought in people's names, but they had this access to them.
I think they thought they'd worked it out.
They thought they'd worked it out. And they certainly thought, in terms of holidays and other discretionary spending, that was never going to be traced to them, or they were never going to have to be held accountable for that.
Or did they care? Did they think that much? I think they're just so caught up in
I think
absolute whirlwind of this millionaire's lifestyle that I just don't think.
Well, I think they
care.
They're always fighting the last time's battles, if you know what I mean. So at that point, I think they did feel that they could do this spending and it wouldn't see them behind bars, basically. But of course, the feud changed everything. The reaction of the Byrne organised crime group to the death of David Byrne was to create a war on the streets of Dublin, and that with that war came an incredible level of Garda attention initially, but also then attention from international police forces. And within a space of, 3 or 4 years, a large number of those people were behind bars. Ultimately, Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, the head of the Byrne organised crime group, would be convicted last year, serving a 21-year sentence. And now Liam Byrne is looking like he is going to face something equivalent when he's brought back to the UK.
Didn't I have a story around Joanne Byrne and around what the officers in the UK seized when they went into that home in Sutton Road of Bomber Kavanagh, and there was like 40 pairs of designer jeans, Armani jeans. There was like, handbags absolutely falling out of the wardrobes. There was cash stuff.
Cash down the couch, wasn't it? 40 grand in cash.
The couch. There was, it's extraordinary. And like, you look at, say I mentioned Nathan Biggie Little, who's a very close friend of the family, of the Byrne families, probably Lee Byrne's best friend growing up, and was named in those cab proceedings. He appears to have ferried Steven Gerrard around when he visited Ireland, and he brought him to the Black Forge pub and
of course, back
McGregor.
Yeah.
And I know that Little is friends with Conor McGregor, and they kind of they're sort of on the edge of that celebrity as well.
They are.
A little bit, aren't they?
They are. And of course, Conor McGregor was a big fan of Ascot as well, and was there at the same time in the same location as them. They would have had many connections. Conor McGregor would have had to the Byrne family. But yeah, so Nathan Biggie Little, remember, like, Google him, as Liam Byrne said to people. You'll come up with a lot of about Nathan Biggie Little's criminal past, but nonetheless, he was the man who drove Steven Gerrard around when he visited around Paddy's Day this year. He brought him to the Black Forge pub. They were pictured together in the car. Obviously, they weren't snapped by paparazzi. They put up the pictures themselves on social media, and he brought him then. Nathan Biggie Little brought him to meet James Jemmy Byrne. And this is it. There was nothing secretive or anything nobody was ashamed of any of that association.
So if you recall, in the beginning of 2019, as things started falling apart here for the Kinahan organisation, there was a guy, a 23-year-old called Zach Parker, who was killed outside a gym. And his friend at the time, Sean Little, put up on social media his absolutely, like, he'd lost his best friend and all the rest of it. And Parker was somebody who wasn't known to police when he was murdered. Usually if there's a shooting, a gangland shooting, anybody working the beat can just go give you a kind of a background into this guy wasn't known. And actually the only conviction he had related to 3 grand's worth of cocaine.
Yeah, it was something relatively minor. He was a barber and he'd been caught with
He was a barber and he was caught with 3 grand worth of cocaine. And sort of those, I think, who knew him reckoned he'd only dabbled in drugs, but actually, he's shot, so he's involved in a kind of there was a pressure cooker situation had built up over a death actually to the Kinahans, but nonetheless, when he died, he was found to have had 25,000 stashed away in a savings account in a bank. He had been on really fabulous holidays. When you looked at it, he had very expensive artwork all over his body, and Sean Little, who was his very good friend, 21 years of age, he was subsequently murdered a year later, within the year anyway, on the side of a road, 21 years of age. He was a relative of Biggie Little and had been knocking around with Lee Byrne and Biggie Little and had been holidaying with them. And all of this was, of course, all put over all over Instagram, all over their social medias. They wanted people to know they were connected. I thought Sean Little's life was a huge tragedy, actually, because when you looked back over his life in pictures as such, and he had, absolutely fed the social media machine with pictures, you could see how by the age of 19, he was drinking Moe and Shandon. If he took a vodka, he looked for a Grey Goose. He had these very expensive tastes. He had travelled all over the world.
And there's no doubt his connections to the Byrne organised crime group allowed him to be maybe promoted beyond his years.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, that he didn't, you know, have to grow up and develop that drugs business, if you want. He just got catapulted into it because of those connections and the fact that the Byrne organised crime group were looking for people to supply who could work in those different areas than them.
And I think probably as well, they were in that time where if it had been 3 years before, they would have got all the protection that they thought they would by that name.
Yeah, not dissimilar to the sort of Mr. Flashy, where some of the guys who had been on top of the Mr. Flashy organisation, like Trevor Byrne, they had to leave the country or ended up in prison because of the feud, and all of a sudden these guys in their early 20s were sort of promoted beyond their capabilities, and they still had access to these drugs and weapons, and you know, they were reckless, and ultimately a lot of them ended up being killed over drug debts, really.
Like, for sure. And I mean, Parker's funeral itself was a bit of a sight to behold. There was these floral tributes, you know, showing his favourite clothes, Montclair, Canada Goose.
Yeah.
There was big floral designs of Rolex watches with moving hands and all this. And, you know, you dug deeper and you had a look around at this, and the same when Sean Little died, there was this massive big spend on the funeral.
Yeah.
It was this huge big sort of gangster style funeral that this person's life was worth so much. But there was one little thing on Little's Instagram site, and he'd been on holidays with a guy called Lee Boylan, who was his friend, of course, who had been shot too.
Yeah.
And had been left in a wheelchair for some time.
Yeah.
And like, he'd known a lot of violence during his short life, Sean Little, I think.
Yeah.
But the two of them were on a beach in Thailand on a holiday, and Liam Byrne had sent them a little message saying, you know, up the boys or something like that. And Liam Byrne, and you're looking and you're going, why is he encouraging this lifestyle? I mean, he's not somebody who's gone into crime in order to provide for his children and to steer them in a different direction and show them a different
I mean, if
life.
you look, like I'm rewatching The Sopranos actually, and The Sopranos, it's Tony, he wants to push his kids away from that life. But of course, as Liam is arrested there, he's arrested with his nephew.
Exactly.
Jack Kavanagh, who's the son of Thomas Bomber Kavanagh.
22 years of age.
22 years of age.
Facing up to 30 years in prison.
Possibly. And Jack Kavanagh's obviously not being convicted of anything and wouldn't have a criminal past of any great extent. But nonetheless, there's a warrant out for him in the UK. And Jack Kavanagh, hadn't grown up in a house that will put any of our listeners probably to shame, grown up around significant wealth in a very beautiful part of England that you've described. So people get sucked in.
Well, it's probably easy to get sucked in when it's a family business because, of course, the Criminal Assets Bureau case heard that, you know, their like Jack Kavanagh's grandfather, Jaws Byrne, and his wife, Sadie Byrne, that they basically had no involvement in the day-to-day running of the Byrne organised crime group, but it said that Sadie was living and enjoying the sort of the profits and the spoils of it.
Yeah.
So that's your grandmother, and you know, it's sad for that young man. Now he's picked up on this, and we'll hear what charges he's facing ultimately when he's extradited to the UK. But it goes on. It goes on to. But like, where do you go for your kids? And Lee Byrne, there's been no. I mean, I think he was mentioned in the Criminal Assets Bureau case, but not as a significant member, not as a criminal, and not as a member of the Byrne organised crime family. I think he was mentioned because something to do with booking.
Yeah, but certainly no implication that he was involved in any of the criminality.
But you. Say you're Liam Byrne and you provide for your child, because it has to be from him that the provisions have come, unless Lee Byrne has had, won the Euro millions or something that we don't know about. I mean, to be able to afford at his age, to be living this lifestyle he is, to be able to holidaying all the time, to be driving the kind of cars he's driving and all the rest of it. Like, where is next for those kids in their 20s? If you have that much then, what's next? Where do you go next? It's like, what do you aspire to?
I don't know. I mean, this is an issue that's been faced, I think, by children of. In fact, if you see actually some of the mafia in the aftermath of maybe the mafia being broken, there's some great testimony actually from some of the kids who grew up in a certain lifestyle, and then the lifestyle actually came to an end. Actually saw a really good interview with the daughter of one of the Colombo family. It was great. Like, she just described her childhood growing up with just endless wealth, endless parties, endless holidays. Taking that as normal because that's what she grew up with, and then sometime in her 20s, that all of a sudden, not straight away, but coming to an end, and the shock to the system. It was really, really interesting, actually.
And literally sort of like trying to pay a mortgage sort of thing.
Yeah, because the money can run out,
The money can be taken away.
It can be taken away. People can stop paying. Pablo Escobar, wasn't he down to his last million or something when he was caught? I can't remember what exactly they were saying.
Yeah, but sure, he has offspring that don't have a penny and that don't have any money whatsoever, despite the millions that were being eaten by rats that he had hidden away.
So it can all come to an end, this access to the families, and we don't know anything about Lee Byrne in particular. But that's a situation that can occur because there's no doubt that nobody wants to face a court, but I wouldn't fancy facing a court in the UK myself either. And they are, very professional in hunting down those assets in the aftermath of a court case, different than Cab, as you've described before. But Bomber Kavanagh, for example, a lot of his wealth is going to be gone by the time he gets out. There's no doubt about it.
Definitely. I mean, it's being targeted in a proceeds of crime case, as will Liam Byrne's when he goes back. And a lot of their wealth seems to be in around the UK.
Yeah.
They felt a little bit more comfortable investing and owning things around the UK. Now, I believe from previous information that Liam Byrne has investments and properties in particularly nightclubs, etc., in Ibiza.
Yeah.
And I know that the Byrne Organised Crime Group / Kavanagh grouping, whenever they got new drugs and stuff, they tested them out in Ibiza on the party island to see how they went down or whether they were liked or not. And they definitely have strong connections there. They also have possibly got properties out in Mexico.
Yeah.
They were spending a lot of time. But, you wonder, like, what is next for them all, because they've really been targeted. I mean, they're a good few steps ahead of the Kinahans, of the Kinahan family, of Daniel Kinahan, his brother Christopher Jr. and his father. They're that bit further along. They're already been drawn in. Bomber's serving his time. The wife is out there.
Yeah, I mean, the Byrne Organised Crime Group did the more traditional route, I think, of in terms of spending money on properties and things like that. Like, obviously, I think driven by Christie Senior, the Kinahans have tried to be an awful lot smarter and make their assets, much more hard to trace. Mm-hmm. Maybe in terms of, we're hearing Bitcoin and other assets like that they've tried to invest in. But certainly the Byrne Organised Crime Group do seem to have assets that can be seized and will be, I would imagine.
And certainly, we were going to talk about Liam Byrne and what happened in England, the life and all the rest of it. We ended up talking more about his son, but he moved on to Dubai after Bomber Kavanagh was caught on his way back from Mexico. And out in Dubai, he's had to keep himself and his family, presumably with plenty of protection and an expensive lifestyle. But he certainly was putting pressure on businessmen, and particularly in the Liverpool area. He claimed he'd investment in property. I certainly am aware of. I have files and files on some of the properties that he is suspected of having invested in there, office buildings, apartment complexes. I mean, if I know them, you'd like to think that the cops know that, plus multiply by,
Yeah, no, I mean, I think Liverpool was really the stronghold of their drugs trade.
Well, Liverpool and Birmingham, of course.
Liverpool and Birmingham, but Liverpool as well. I mean, I think that was a long-term arrangement. That wasn't in recent years.
How did they muscle their way into that?
Well, I think they had they had the drugs. I mean, I think
money,
it's as simple as that, and they could provide firearms and drugs to people.
Yeah.
And they had people there who were willing to take it on, and they had a new generation that came through, and we've written about some of them. You know, Liam Cornett, for example, and people like that who made huge money out of their association with the Kinahan Cartel.
We've no established connection yet between Lee Cullen and the weapons offences that he's currently serving time for, and anything to do with Liam Byrne. Although a similar kind of a setup, I think, to have weapons that are...
Well, it was I mean, I think Lee Cullen he got a long sentence, of course, but, you know, some of that, it seemed more kind of maybe less organised. But again, Lee Cullen was named in the affidavit as a gang member for the Byrne organised crime group. He seemed to have owed them a huge amount of money from his time in Ireland. And when he got over there, he seems to have been almost like an indentured servant to them, who did what he was told in order to pay off this almost unpayable debt of a couple of million. The guns he was brought in and ultimately convicted for, like they were kind of replica weapons that were being repurposed.
Yeah.
I mean, it didn't seem to the extent that what we're dealing with Liam Byrne. Of course, the interesting bit is, as we hear, the arrest warrant from the UK mentions Encrochat. Not going to get all into that again.
We're going to get into that on a
separate thing.
I'm going to have a good rant about Encrochat. Okay. No, I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
I think, you know...
But the idea, of course, that you know, that he was on Encrochat to people in the UK, but wasn't on Encrochat to people in Ireland seems... not
ridiculous. And of course, you know, Encrochat, no Irish criminals used Encrochat, so there's no point in actually...
Except for the ones that were operating in England and the UK.
And Northern Ireland. So there was just this little bubble in Europe called Ireland where nobody used Encrochat, you know, ridiculous. But we will definitely come to that later in the week, because I think we'll go through a lot of the cases that are still going before the courts, the kind of people who
and they're daily coming through. And I just saw another one today, a guy in Liverpool, $29 million or pound turnover in 2 years of drugs. Never heard of him.
Yeah.
Not a top guy, like, you know, 29 million turnover now, not profit.
Yeah.
And these are the types of guys that were being supplied by the Byrne organised crime group. They were wholesaling it within their area. But the Byrne organised crime group were providing them with cocaine, really.
Okay, well, listen, we'll talk about this a bit later. The Encrochat. I just wanted to finish by saying, did you see Waterford Whispers stole your line about the flip flops?
Yeah.
Yeah, you afraid of Waterford Whispers?
No, I mean they've
stole it.
They do. Well, they regularly read the Sunday World and give us a slightly hard time. I always loved their gang of pixelated youth terrorising the streets, says the Sunday World.
But what was the headline about? He wouldn't have worn flip-flops.
So you knew he was going to be arrested.
Yeah, no, they do feature very heavily flip-flops in lots of these guys. Anyway, look, we will reconvene.
Reconvene.
All right.
Thanks, Nicola.